let's start about the new topic, which is very important, and which is the large or long answer question is transport across the cell membrane. Transport across the cell membrane. Remember, this is the 8-mark question, so you need to know. So this can be asked as a long answer question, or the short notes can be asked. As per we will go through the this question or the topic, I'll let you know what can be the short notes in this, or the Viva exams. In the Vivas, you'll be going to ask the this thing, examples of particular transport system or type, right? So let's start with the transport across the cell membrane. Now always remember, there are two types of transport, two types of this transport. Majoritarily it is of active and passive, right? We know that it is of active and passive type, right? Now the active, why it is known as active? Because it uses the energy. Why? Because it's going against the concentration gradient, right? It is going against the concentration gradient, and that's why it needs energy, right? So it is using energy, and energy in the form of, yes, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, right? And how it is going against the gradient? What do you mean by against the gradient? It is going from low to high concentration, low to high concentration, right? And it is using the ATPs, for example, the pumps, right? Don't worry, we are going to discuss each thing in the detail because it is very crucial topic, right? So this is about the active system, right? What about the passive transport? It go along the gradient. Remember, the passive is going along the gradient, active against the gradient. Along the concentration gradient. From where to where? From high concentration to low concentration. That's why it is going along the concentration. So that's why cell does not require any extra effort for that. So it does not uses the ATP, right? The concentration itself will cause the transport, right? So no ATP or energy is needed. Remember, there is no ATP or energy is needed, right? And what example you can give over here is the gas transport, for example, the O2 and CO2 transport. O2 and CO2 transport. So that's the basic difference between the major type of the transport, which is the active and passive. Active, right, and passive. So the active and passive. So that is the major difference between the active system and the passive system, right? Now let's elaborate this topic because this can be asked as a long question. So you should be knowing the points inside the active transport and the passive transport. This can be asked as a separately as the short note question, right? So write the note on the active transport across the cell membrane. So you should be knowing what all the things you have to say or write, right? So active transport, again it is having the subtypes, right? So active transport. So let's see what are the types it is consisting of, right? So first thing is primary, right? Always it is primary. Next subtype is secondary, right? And third is very crucial. Many students doesn't know that it is having 3 types. They always remember primary and secondary, but remember the active transport is of 3 types. The third one is, yes, the vesicular transport. Vesicular transport, right? So let's discuss first of all about the primary and secondary, right? What is about the primary active transport? So how you'll write primary active transport, right? So primary active transport, why it is known as primary? Because it is using the ATP directly. Using the ATP directly, right? So what is the example of it? It is the pumps. All the pumps inside the body, they come under, yes, the primary active transport. Primary active transport, right? So pumps, for example, if you are asked in the exam to give the examples is, for example, the important pump is the sodium potassium pump, which is known as the universal pump, that we will discuss in detail. Sodium potassium pump or any calcium pumps, right? Or yes, the potassium hydrogen pumps, and so on and so forth. Now how you will remember this? That primary comes under the, yes, to remember, P is for primary and P is for pumps. So remember, they uses ATP directly, that's why they are known as primary active transport, and example are pumps. P for primary, P for pumps, right? Let's discuss about the secondary. It is active transport, so it is also using the energy. Then what's the difference? It using energy, it is using ATP indirectly. It is using the energy indirectly, right? So it is known as secondary active transport, right? And what are the example of it is antipode and a sympode. Remember, what do you mean by using ATP directly is that substance which is going inside the cell, it is using that energy. But if some substance is going inside the cell but it is using the concentration gradient of another substance, that is known as the secondary active transport, right? For example, if the crowded bus come to you and you have to go inside that bus, that is, you will push the people and you will apply the force and you will go inside that crowded bus. But if you have a small little kid which cannot fight for its own place, so what you have to do is, you will push for yourself, you will create the space inside that crowded bus for yourself as well as for that kid too. So that kid uses the ATP indirectly. That kid is not using his or her own energy, but it is using your energy, right? So similarly, the secondary active transport will work, right? So it is using the ATP or concentration gradient of another substance, right? Now, what are the example? Antipode, the examples are the potassium hydrogen antipode, right? And there are many examples. You need to remember is antipode is also known as what thing? It is also known as, it is antipode, so it is also known as counter transport. Why I am telling you is, I saw many short notes on the counter transport. The student get confused. There is nothing to get confused. If they ask about the counter transport, you have to write about the antipodes, right? So write down in which system it is coming, how they are going to transport, and the examples, right? And sympode, similarly, the sympode is also known as co-transport. Co-transport. Anti means if some one substance is going inside, the another substance will go outside, that is they are in the opposite direction, that's why it is known as anti or counter transport. In the case of sympode, both the substances either going inside or coming outside, right? So that's why they are known as co-transport. Now the examples can be of the secondary active transport is sodium potassium pumps, symport, other than ports I should write symport, right, sodium iodide if the positive substance, rather I should write antiport, sodium iodide in the thyroid, symport, right, sodium glucose symport, and so on and so forth, right. So these are some examples of secondary active transport. Let's moving on to the third one, which is the vesicular transport. Now remember, the vesicular transport again divided into subtypes. Now what is it? You must know. Vesicular transport is important, very very important, because it came as a short note for 4 marks. Okay. So it is divided into further subtypes, which is the endocytosis, as you all know, and the another is exocytosis. Not only this, again this endocytosis is subdivided into 3 subtypes, that is, yes, first one is receptor-mediated endocytosis, right. Then second one is the phagocytosis, and third one is pinocytosis. Third one is pinocytosis, right. We will discuss that in a bit. Let's first discuss the exocytosis. Now what do you mean by endocytosis or exocytosis? First we will discuss the exocytosis is the movement of any substance out of the cell. That means exo, it is getting exited from the cell, right, in the form of secretory vesicles. So that's the difference over here in the vesicular transport. Name itself suggests that it is a vesicular transport, so it should be going out or coming in with the help of secretory vesicles, right. So that is about the exocytosis. For the examples, if we have to give for the exocytosis, are the neurotransmitters, hormones, different hormones, and your digestive enzymes. They all use exocytosis, neurotransmitter, hormones and digestive enzymes, right. Now let's discuss the endocytosis one by one. First of all, coming to the receptor mediated endocytosis. First coming on to the, yes, receptor mediated endocytosis. Now what happened in this is there is a ligand, right. If there is a receptor, there must be a ligand. So ligand is there, and ligand gated receptor complex will be formed, and not only form, it get ingested. So ingestion. So there is an ingestion because it is an endocytosis. So the substances are going inside. First of all, if I have to define endocytosis, how I can define? Similarly as exocytosis, the only difference is that in the exocytosis the substances are going out, and in the endocytosis the substances are coming in. So it is the movement of substance into a cell in the form of vesicles. Now we will not say secretion, because if you are saying secretion, that means it is going out of the cell, right. So something is coming inside the cell in the form of vesicles. So that is the vesicular transport of type endocytosis. So, it is coming in, so that's why it is known as endo, right. So, receptor mediated endocytosis. Now, it is a form of endo, so that's why the ingestion is there, right. Once the ligand gated receptor complex is formed, it is getting ingested inside the cell, right. So, what are the examples of this? The examples of this is, yes, very important. This is the potent viva question. Yes, what is that? The examples are iron and cholesterol transport inside the body from the GIT, right. So, if you will give this answer, your professors will be very happy with you, right. So, this is the receptor mediated endocytosis. It is the first type of endocytosis subtype, right. Next subtype was the phagocytosis, as you very much aware about it, phagocytosis, right. Let's discuss the phagocytosis now. What is phagocytosis? In short, it is nothing but the engulfment of solid particles. Now, the major role of this phagocytosis is in the immunity, right. The immune system will use this phagocytosis for ingestion of either the bacteria, viruses, or even the toxic substances or the pollen grains, right. The particles which are harmful for our body and which are foreign to our body, then those will get phagocytosed, right. So, it is nothing but the engulfment. How? With the help of podocyte. They have a projection, hand like a projection. They will surround those projection against those foreign particles or matter or virus or bacteria, and they will ingest them, right. So, they will engulf them with the help of podocytes. So, you can write with the help of podocytes, right, in the immunity. Right. So, they have hand-like projections and they will engulf with that, right. So, moving on to the example, we already discussed that the examples are bacterias, viruses, the dead cells are also get phagocytosed, okay. So, not only the bacteria, viruses, but the dead cells are also, or the debris are also get phagocytosed, right. Okay. So, moving on to the third subtype, that is Pinocytosis. Now, what are the points about Pinocytosis is, it is the cell drinking movement of ECF into a cell, right. And what is the example? Yes, it is the solutes in ECF. So, what is the difference between phagocytosis and pinocytosis? It was of the solid particles and it is a drinking movement, right, of ECF into a cell, right. So, as the solute go inside, the water also goes inside, right. So, this is about the cell drinking movement of a ECF into the cell. So, that is the pinocytosis, which is the third type of vesicular transport in the endocytosis, right. So, this is all about your active transport, right. This can be a short note or a long question, right, and in Viva they can ask you about the examples too. So, without any further delay, let's move on to our next transport, that is passive transport. So, I hope you are getting the link how we are proceeding in the transport across the cell membrane. We first of all discussed that the transport is of two types, that is active as well as passive. Then we move on to the active transport. First of all, it is of three primary types, right, and in the vesicular types they have again divided into two subtypes, endo and exo. Endo further subdivided into three types. Now we are moving towards the passive transport. Again remember, passive transport is of two types, majority is of two types, that is the diffusion and osmosis. Diffusion and osmosis. Now coming on to the diffusion, diffusion is further subdivided into again two types, that is a simple and facilitated, right? Simple and facilitated. Let's discuss first of all about this. What is simple diffusion? Is as the name suggests, simple, that means there is no carrier or channels required. No carrier or channels required. What is the example of this? There are many examples. In your vivas also ask that, they will give the example and they will ask you that what type of transport it is. So you should be knowing that the transport of gases, for example oxygen or carbon dioxide diffusion, right? The fatty acids, steroids, fat soluble vitamins. Fat soluble vitamins, right? So these are some examples about the diffusion process of the simple diffusion. Moving on to the facilitated diffusion. Now why it is known as facilitated? Facilitating means enhancing something, it is facilitating something. So write down, to increase the diffusion rate. To increase the diffusion rate, the carrier or the channel are used. The channels or the carriers are used. Now for what thing? Polar or charged solutes. Okay, the excellent student must know this. This thing is used, facilitated diffusion is particularly used for, yes, polar or charged solutes. Like example, GLUT, right? Glucose transporter. Glucose transporter, right? So this is about the diffusion. Let's move on to the osmosis. We are not going to talk much about the osmosis over here because the major role is in the kidney. We will discuss in a lot of detail over there, but now for now you should remember that in the osmosis it will go from higher concentration to lower concentration of what? Of not the solute, of water. Higher concentration of water to the lower concentration of water. Remember, that is known as osmosis, right? Through what is the significance of that? It required the selectively permeable membrane. Selectively permeable membrane, right? Example is water, right? Osmosis is majorly happen of regarding the water, right? So it is of water. So this is about the passive transport. So this is the whole note for your, yes, transport across the cell membrane. It is for the transport across the cell membrane, right? Okay, so